That story by Nasi Pisame brings the focus on racism, bullying and also violence in school. So on our question tonight, we ask if your child or yourself have experienced racism, and also how do you deal with it? But also what is going on in the schools, right? What do you make of how safe your children feel at school? Send us a WhatsApp on 072-110-5584 or give us a call, 010-594-6010. We're joined in studio by the Director for Social Cohesion at the Department of Basic Education, Liko Bottoman. We also are joined via video link. We have NAPTOS's Executive Director, Basil Manuel, and the Federation of Governing Bodies of South Africa, their very own Dr. Juan van der Merwe. Juan van der Merwe, thank you so much for joining us, guys, and this is such an important discussion. I think one of the things that makes it difficult, though, is that we see so many of these incidents of racism and even violence in schools, and every time we see these discussions, there's a sense that we're starting from scratch, needing to talk about why 30 years on to our democracy, we still have these problems. But Liko, I'm gonna let you go first. From the Department of Basic Education, what do you make of the situation of that particular school in Kuils River?
It actually really is disheartening, Naledi, to find out that children are still experiencing these kinds of incidences in schools. Because our conviction as the Department of Basic Education is that schools protect the well-being of children. In fact, children are safest when they are in school than when they are in the streets. That's why we encourage children to come into schools. Now, when you discover that children are being violated, children are being discriminated against, and all of those similar incidences, it is a call for us to really just reconsider the way that we do things. Maybe things have changed. The world on which we live has shifted from right beneath our feet, and we need to hear from children. Where exactly are we missing the mark so that we're able to respond better to protect children?
Yeah, but where are we missing the mark? You've got the massive responsibility of being the Director of Social Cohesion at the Department of Basic Education. It's a big job, but what does it look like when you talk social cohesion in schools? So what do you, I suppose what do your roles and responsibilities look like?
You know, so for us, it has always been about ensuring that the content that we deliver in curriculum is teaching children about equal rights, equality, and diversity and inclusion. That has always been the strongest point of the basic education sector, that we are going to teach about constitutional rights so that children understand that we come from different backgrounds, but at the same time, we need to ensure that we respect one another and we respect each other's dignity. That has always been our strongest point. The second thing that we've been able to do was to work collaboratively with our teacher unions to ensure that we deliver, you know, responsive teacher development programs that prepare teachers to teach in diverse environments, but to also then be able to dispense, you know, disciplinary mechanisms that are an alternative to corporal punishment, because we don't want corporal punishment in schools. We want children to learn in an environment that is violence-free, that is discrimination-free, that allows them to be who they want to be so that they can then thrive. And also we do provide some content even in learning and teaching support materials in our textbooks, because that is the point of contact that is you know, that is palpable, that children can engage with. And sometimes we even provide digital materials to children, because we understand right now that they are on social media. So how do you then provide that kind of literacy to children so that they understand that the human rights violations is not supposed to be an acceptable phenomenon in our schools? They need to understand that they must speak up against that, and they need to have the assurance and the confidence that schools will do something about it when they report it. It becomes disheartening and a bit of a disappointment to children when they learn that when they report these incidences, nobody does anything about them.
Yeah, because I mean, the allegations at this particular school are terrifying if a parent were to hear that this is what their daughter is going through, right? A learner, Basil, that says that threatens to impregnate learners, so that he can have slaves for the rest of his life, and then showing to them disturbing content digitally that I suppose shows, violent sexual behavior. Then, having threatened to bring a knife to school at some point to stab one of the female students. I don't know if at face value, Basil, when you hear this, you hear just racism or just as a culture, multiple other issues here. Good evening.
Good evening, Naledi, and good evening to Liko as well as Joanne. First of all, I'm worried about a youngster that exhibits this. It says that this youngster needs help. He's a 16-year-old, and to have such violent thoughts and have the power that he has over all these girls because of a particular status he thinks he has, it says that he is the one that needs the most intervention because this youngster will enter into the broader network of life in a few years' time. And then what? And this is the problem with gender-based violence, is that if we don't sort out attitudes at school level, then we release these children into the great unknown where they commit major atrocities. The tragedy is that complaints were registered. The tragedy is that these girls were calling for help and that help was not forthcoming. And that's the first and the biggest failure in terms of the school, that they didn't react fast enough, because it's not a month. According to the reports, it seems to be a long time. Now, when once a child asks for help, you've got to stand up and do something, because these types of behavior, the gender-based violence, the threatening behavior, the racist behavior, etc., happen where the teacher doesn't necessarily see. And you cannot say, until I see, it can't be true. You have to react immediately. And the parents are there. No parent wants their child subjected to things like this. So what I see immediately is that there has been failure to assist these girls. I'm happy they stood up. Let's applaud them, because many, many, many children suffer through acts of discrimination, acts of threats and even violence, and they never report it.
Yeah.
These stood up, and that is the first thing that we must applaud.
These are learners that would have gone through quite a lot. I mean, one of the girls is saying that this boy showed her a video of a father cutting off his daughter's head, for instance, and apologies for the viewers if that's quite graphic. I mean, it's horrific. And I want to now, Dr. Van der Merwe, bring you in here, because obviously there's a role that SGBs, for instance, need to be playing. Where, for instance, there is a disciplinary hearing, here there certainly was, for the 16-year-old boy who was displayed, violent threats towards these girls, racist behavior and racist utterances to them. The mother of the daughter saying that in a disciplinary hearing that took place on the 19th, the boy's father was allowed to cross-examine one of the girls who was one of the alleged victims, but the mother was not allowed to ask any questions to the boys. So, I mean, there's a mismatch here in how SGBs and how, policies are done and how we get to the bottom of justice in schools. Do you see that mismatch, particularly where race and power is concerned?
Well, thank you, Naledi, and good evening to our other guests as well. I think, well, first of all, let's just start off to say that I think racism and bullying in schools are not just an issue of individual behavior. I truly think it reflects deeper systemic challenges that requires both immediate and long-term responses. Basil also referred to the fact that this specific individual learner himself truly needs help, and that's long-term investments and responses that we need to see in that specific regard. And specifically, when we look at schools, we know that schools are not only just places of education, but they are also foundational spaces for shaping a just and inclusive society. And specifically, when we deal with incidences as this, we'd like to see that those incidences are approached with the necessary seriousness at which we want them to be be dealt with. Our governing bodies, our educators, our school communities all share this responsibilities to ensure that our learners feel safe and valued and respected. Now, the role of the governing body immediately would be to follow the processes as is prescribed by the Schools Act. In an incident like this, one would then follow a proper disciplinary hearing, giving both parties the opportunity to cross-examine the witnesses that is being brought forth, and then finally to ultimately come to a conclusion as to what is the outcome of the disciplinary hearing. And in this specific regard, Naledi, I would also like to emphasize that we're working with minors in the education system. We want to prepare them for adulthood one day. Therefore, when we deal with these types of incidences, we want to look at the victim, how we can support them, how we can ensure that we protect them to enable them to deal with what has happened with them, psychologists and so forth. But also when we look at the perpetrator, if I can put it like that, we have to look at a restorative justice approach as well. I mean, in some way, we need to rehabilitate this individual. We need to assist this individual. We need to evaluate why this individual is acting the way they are acting. And how do we go about to ensure that an incident like this doesn't happen again?
But where threats have been, because where threats have been made, I mean, this is what happened in this case, is that this young man, according to the disciplinary process of the school, was found, guilty in some of the actions that were brought forward, but no sort of actions were determined. Sanctions would be determined in due course, is what the parents of the girls, the victims, were told. So what I'm trying to find is, as a school policy, what is the priority? Because to say that there needs to be a restorative approach is one thing. A 16-year-old is a minor and there needs to be work to understand what's gone wrong there. But one would think that the priority should be to protect the girls, right, Dr. van der Merwe? Because to say there's, sanctions will be dealt with in due course, that boy goes back into the schools, the girls are still feeling unsafe. Have we prioritized right in the actions as an SGB?
Well, very important is for the governing body to definitely follow the code of conduct, and the code of conduct will set out the process that needs to be followed. Now, in an incident as serious as this, one would expect the governing body to, as quickly as possible, go through a proper investigation, to go through the charges and to have a proper disciplinary hearing. And then thereafter, only once you've been through the disciplinary hearing, you will only know what the serious nature of that is. And then one can decide on what the sanction would be. And obviously, definitely, one would have to consider, how do we safeguard the female learners in this specific case? How do we safeguard them? But also not abandoning the individual that's considered to be the perpetrator. I mean, we have to consider a restorative process for that individual as well. So there's a balance that needs to be followed. But obviously, in something as serious as a nature of this, one will have to try and go through the disciplinary process as quick as possible. Look at what lies underneath. There might be some social issues this learner is experiencing. How do we address that as well? But ultimately, the best interest of the child is always weighs the heaviest. And I think that should be the guiding principle throughout the whole disciplinary process.
Basil, I see you nodding.
I'm agreeing in terms of the process. I'm also agreeing with the fact that these girls definitely need the protection. And Naledi, 8 out of 10 times this boy is coming back to the same school. And that is where the bigger problem shows itself, because these girls will continue to feel unsafe. And there have to be mechanisms that have to make these girls safer, because expelling a learner is very difficult. And remember, it's not the school that does it. The governing body simply makes a recommendation, and then it is the HOD that will make the final decision whether expulsion is going to be the way. But that same child has a right to education as well. We talk about the best interest of the child. They're all children. And this is where the real nub comes in. And that is why this feeling of unhappiness of parents with outcomes, and of course, the fear of these girls. We have to address that as a whole problem. And I can understand how unhappy parents would be when they hear something like this being said, because they, I'm sure, wanted to see this young man taken out. But Joanne made a very important point about all of them needing assistance, needing counseling, and it's a long-term thing. I had read that even one of the threats was even saying to one of the girls, don't you want to kill yourself, commit suicide, and so on. And it shows you this boy is really troubled. So we need to assist him, and we need the father to also see that this youngster needs assistance. It is not healthy for any child to be doing such things, but the school must be a safe environment. And that is why my particular appeal is teachers, principals, listen to the children. Protect the children, because that is the only way that your school becomes a safe school.
Yeah. Liko, I'm going to let you have the final bite here, because a lot has been said around a restorative approach. Something has gone terribly wrong in the upbringing, perhaps, of this 16-year-old boy. But let's not forget that one of the parents even talked about their daughter being on antidepressants as a result of all the stress that she's been taking. And this is, you know, experiences that have been shared by multiple children at the school. And as Basil says, 8 out of 10 is that this boy will find his way back into school. One of the learners saying that they were terrified because they were informed that this boy would be escorted by security as they moved around the school, and that never happened. And one of the little girls terrified to be at school. From a priority point of view, if we prioritize the right person, that's the first thing. And then also, I mean, just talk to me about where you see your own department needing to step things up, because it certainly is one thing to say, well, the SGB needs to look at how they deal with bad behavior and discrimination and even threats of violence in the school, what teachers are supposed to do. But there's a role that the department needs to be playing as well, and that is going into schools and actually having programs that are in place to equip everyone to deal with discriminatory issues.
So I think, Naledi, I want to align with what Dr. van der Merwe and Mr. Manuel were saying around the best interests of the child, because that's what we need to protect. And, you know, even with the child who is regarded as the perpetrator in this case, that yes, you are correct to say that we need to prioritize the extent and the intensity of risk and vulnerability for these children. But I think if you are using your trauma-informed approaches to management and leadership in education, you'd understand that sometimes the question that we ask is not so much why you did that, is more like who hurt you, because we understand that children who exhibit that kind of behavior in schools, especially if they are minors, it can't be that they come from, you know, stable homes or homes where there is no exposure to this kind of violence or this kind of behavior. But also, Naledi, we need to be very careful about the kind of conversations we have with our children at dinner tables around race, around gender, around violence, and all of these things combined. Because children pick up on those things and then they come and they exhibit them in the school. Yeah. It's such a pity that this matter that we're discussing is a matter of pertinence in our society. We can't turn really a blind eye and not discuss it because children are involved. Yeah. But I think even in the way that we discuss these issues, we also need to be mindful of the fact that in the end, when the restorative process is done with that 16-year-old, that 16-year-old needs to come back to school, and they need to, maybe they may change for the better. Who knows? They may even use their agency to talk to other potential bullies and violators in schools so that they don't do what he did. But in any case, what we're doing now with SGB associations and teacher unions is that we're trying to put together some sector guidance, because we already have sector guidance that deals with the management and reporting of sexual abuse and harassment in schools. At least we have that. Schools are quite conversant with what they need to do in the event that there is sexual violation in schools. So what we're going to do now is to put out sector guidance that also then looks at management of unfair discrimination in schools. In these cases would then be managed like that, because there is already policy, frameworks and legislation that guide that. But we believe as basic education that we still need to provide some instruments to schools so that they're not looking at different policy documents, because they don't have time for that.
Yeah.
Schools are busy and a lot of things are happening in schools. But if you've got a document that guides you in the event of an unfair discrimination incident in your schools, these are the steps that you need to follow in order for you to do that. So that's what we can do. And in addition to that, we are now learning about new phenomena around discrimination and prejudice in schools. And so we're factoring this in our exemplar code of conduct for schools. You'll recall, Naledi, that there have been other incidences other than racism of discrimination happening in schools. And so we want this exemplar code of conduct to be a guiding framework for all schools in South Africa, that when they design their codes of conduct, their hands and feet are not tied so that they can't act, because you may find that sometimes schools are reluctant or hesitant to act because they are acting within confines of a code of conduct.
Perhaps that needs to be relooked at.
Absolutely.
And we saw this, for instance, with the Pretoria Girls High, where a code of conduct, for instance, had a hair policy that simply was, seen as discriminatory, and that needing to be relooked. But we're going to have to wrap it up there. Thank you so much to our guests. But we've got some WhatsApps that have come in. Let's take a look at some of those. Of course, that number 072-110-5584. Matiba says, regarding the racism at the Cape Town school, it's about time we see the parents of racist children. Teaching starts at home. For as long as you hide the parents, racism in schools will keep popping up. Yeah, we've heard that from our guests as well right now. We need to be dealing with the parents. Tsego Smith says, good evening. I faced racism when I was 16 years old at Hoërskool Lichtenburg in the Northwest. We were changing classes and a white boy called me the K word unprovoked. I turned around and swore at him. The teacher that was passing by took me alone to the deputy principal and I got the detention. My parents still don't know about this. I'm now 34 years old. This was in 2006, but I still remember. And that's a traumatic experience. We've got callers on the line. Mutsiri's on the line from Alberton. Mutsiri, good evening. Thanks for calling.
How are you?
I'm well, sir. Thank you for calling. What are your thoughts?
When I'm talking from the races that happened with my son at the University of Cape Town. My son was killed, actually, by the white student. And the university lies to us as parents. They told us that our son was drowned, of which they were lying from the first point. And one white student, a girl, came to me, hold my hand, and says, Mr. Madiba, I'm sorry, I'm the one who fetched boys from the room. I didn't know that we were going to kill him. And he was studying, and then they take him, and they throw him at the dam. And I think because the police refuse us to see him, they say the law in Cape Town, you are not allowed to see the body of a black child. You are not allowed. You are only allowed to see the face. So we will not even have the opportunity to see our son. So, and another white student by the name of Samantha Paul pulled a girl who was telling me that how my son was killed. And she told her that we were told not to talk. Why are you talking? So my son was murdered, and then another white student came and gave me his bag, and then his particulars, and then he had blood coming out from on his neck, and then he covered his neck with bandages. So even today, I tried almost everything to get closure, to know what happened to our son.
Tell me, when did this happen in that day? Just talk to me about the timeline here. How long ago was this?
Now, I think it's the 7 year trying to get the closure from the University of Cape Town. And then every day I've been trying, I've been harassed, I've been arrested maybe 2 times or 3 times by the law enforcement. and the policeman told me that I must leave this case because of these people are connected with the president, they are connected in government, and then they are connected with the police and are connected with the judiciary.
Sure.
So I must leave the
Okay.
case. They came to our house, they break in our house, they done everything. They've arrested me when I'm trying to get the closure to know what happened to our son.
Yeah,
But my son was killed by white students.
That
And the girl confirmed the truth, and she told me, the white girl, that I'm the one who fetched my son from the room while she was studying, and then he was murdered, cold blood, by white people, by white students.
Let me
And
tell you
now
this,
I
Ntate Mutsiri.
went to strike
I'm out of time,
at
Ntate
the
Mutsiri,
parliament.
unfortunately. But this is what I'm going to do. Please stay on the line. Our producers are going to take your numbers. We are going to follow up on the story with UCT, with yourself, and hear from all the various role players. So please do stay on the line so that our producers can take your details. That's where we wrap things up, unfortunately, for that discussion. Newsfeed PM continues, and we'll be looking into that issue. But you can now hear just how palpable the pain of racist action really looks like in some of our educational institutions as we send our children there to get an education. The battles they fight, so much more difficult than what we expect. Thank you so much to Liko Bottoman, Director for Social Cohesion at the Department of Basic Education, Dr. Zwane van der Merwe from the Federation of Governing Bodies of South Africa, as well as Basil Manuel of the National Professional Teachers Organization of South Africa. We're back in a moment. Stay with us.